Welcome to Walk in Truth. These are the Bible teachings of Pastor Michael Lantz, equipping you to reach out with God's truth to all people and how to apply that truth to today's issues, trends, and culture. Learn more about the program and our ministry when you visit walkintruth.com. Now here's Pastor Michael's second teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 called Knowledge Puffs Up, Love Builds Up.
The title that knowledge puffs up is the idea that knowledge without love can swell us up. Instead of building us up, it can swell us up. But when we have love, love's goal is always to build up. And the Corinthians were raised in a culture that was really just filled with different gods and goddesses, what we would call idols. And they were all over the landscape. And if you were raised in a Gentile pagan home, this is what you knew. You knew gods and goddesses of the earth and the sky and the sea. And they would make sacrifices to these gods. And these gods had pagan temples in these cities. And they would try to appease them or try to sacrifice to them to get blessings back in their own life. They lived largely in fear of these idols. And the Apostle Paul came into Corinth, and he preached the message of the one true God. If you look at 1 Corinthians 8:4, it says these words, "Therefore concerning the eating of things offered to idols," 1 Corinthians 8:4, "we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and there is no other God but one." And so when Paul went into Corinth or Thessalonica or other places, Ephesus, he began to say that there's only one true God. All these thousands of gods that you've known, gods with a small g, so-called gods, are actually false. They have no reality. If there is any reality behind them, it's demonic. But they're just made of wood and stone and so forth. And they can't talk. Psalm 115, they can't see, they can't feel. And the psalmist says, those who make them will be like them. Romans 1 picks up this theme and says that those who make idols really make idols, to be like man or creatures. And really, they make an idol that really represents the ultimate idolatry, which is self. And Dr. Martin famously said, Dr. Walter Martin, who's since gone home to be with the Lord, more people than you could shake a stick at shave their God every morning. Or not to leave the women out, curl her hair. One of the biggest struggles we have is idolatry of self. And in Corinth, the people were so concerned about their individual rights, they were using their knowledge, even right theology, to do wrong action. They were going back into the idol's temple. Sometimes restaurants were connected with these temples. And they were eating there. They were dining there. And they were participating in some way in idolatry, but they were justifying it theologically. They were saying, it's okay because we already know, Paul's already preached that an idol's nothing. It's just a block of stone or a piece of wood. It's made by man and often fashioned in the image of man or an animal. It means nothing. But there were more sensitive souls or people who were newer to the faith who were being stumbled by this activity. Maybe they would walk by an outside restaurant connected to a temple, see a more mature Christian leader sitting and dining in the idol's temple, and it was a stumbling block to them. When Paul was in Ephesus and he was preaching the one true God, there was a whole riot that was drummed up, and Demetrius, the leader of the silversmiths, said, Paul has convinced people all around that there is only one true God and that our great goddess, Artemis or Diana, is false. And she was. And there was a riot because Paul was preaching the one true God. And we have to understand in our culture that that's not a popular message. That when we say there's one true God, one true way, one true path, that's the one thing that seems to be unacceptable in our culture. To preach the fact that there's one true God, but there is one true God by nature. There are so-called gods, false gods and goddesses, but they're simply idols. And if they have any reality to them, they're demonic. But they're simply man-made things. That's not the God of the Bible. In verse 6, 1 Corinthians 8, Paul says, "Yet for us, for believers, there is but one God, the Father, from whom are all things, he created everything, and we exist for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, so closely connected to the Father that he's called Lord, shadowing or echoing the Hebrew Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Jesus Christ is God, second person of the Holy Trinity. And when we call him Lord, we are really using a divine name. Anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. That's from the book of Joel, and it goes over, of course, to the book of Romans. And so this is an early creedal statement. What do you mean, Pastor Michael? I mean this, that early believers would repeat this. This was kind of a phrase to capture their faith, and maybe even spoken at people's baptisms. Notice you have the Father from whom are all things. We exist for him. We have one Lord Jesus Christ by whom are all things, and we exist through him. We live through Christ. He created us. He redeemed us. Notice, we exist for God, not for ourselves. We were made to honor and glorify him. And I'll say this to you. The more you try to keep yourself autonomous from God, you try to live your life without God, the more empty you will find yourself to be. In fact, I would say, and I think we all realize this who have become Christians, that God has given us kind of this place in our heart that we're going to sense an emptiness until we find him. The writer of Ecclesiastes says God has put eternity in our hearts. We long for something more. As human beings, we ask the big questions, the why questions. Why am I here? Why do I exist? Where am I going? And 1 Corinthians 8:6 says, we belong to God. We live for him. Jesus Christ is our creator and our redeemer. However, look at verse 7. This is a strong adversative. It's kind of telling us there's not all people who have this knowledge. Not all men have this knowledge, but some, 7, being accustomed to the idol, this is what they grew up in until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol or a real God, small g. And their conscience being weak is defiled. Some people may be strengthened by what they saw in their culture. Maybe they saw other Christians going back to the world and they said, oh, I can do that too. Okay, that person shared a Bible verse with me and that Bible verse says an idol's really nothing. So I'll go back and I'll participate some way in idolatry again. Only to find that when they did it, when they took the bite, when they entered into the pagan temple, their conscience began to beat them up. They polluted or defiled or compromised their conscience. And it is not a good thing to go against your conscience. You see, whatever you can't do from faith is actually sin. And while some people were going into the idol's temple and saying, I'm cool, I'm good, because theologically I understand that thing is nothing, there were still others who were having their conscience defiled by that very act. Their conscience, described here at end of verse 7 as being weak, is then defiled. And the word here is soiled, stained, or made dirty. I heard a question come in. I'm trying to remember the exact show it was, but it was this idea of a person and a modern movement where they're saying now evangelical Christians are thinking that it's a good idea that they go back, for example, to a bar, and maybe they were an alcoholic in their former life. They've come to Christ. Now to go back into bars and talk like people in the world talk and hang out there and throw back a couple of cold ones and share your faith with the world. And you know what? The response of that pastor was like, I'm not sure that that's a really good idea. Because there's other ways that we can reach the world. We don't have to go into the bar and slam back a cold one to talk their language. You see, we can talk to them at work and we can hang out with them in other contexts. But we have to be cool and hip and in now. But you know what we do sometimes is we're not strong enough to go back to those places. We think we are. And maybe there's something in us that wants to go back because we kind of miss some of that. Maybe we want to go back and we say, oh yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to witness to my buddies. I'm going to go back into that scene. I'll go back into the nightclub scene. I'll go back into the gentleman's club. There I think I can reach some people. I just won't look. See, sometimes on a sub-level, we're making it sound good, but maybe it's not good. Or maybe our motives are a bit mixed. Maybe we've put the idol back in front of our face because there's something in our flesh that wants to go back there, but we give it a Christian spin. I'm good. I can do that.
You'll hear more from Pastor Michael in a moment.
Pastor Michael and the Walk in Truth team would love to hear from you. Maybe you have comments or questions. You can leave a voicemail at 844-48-TRUTH. That's 844-48-TRUTH. But maybe you're more of a writer. You can email Pastor Michael at contact@walkintruth.com. That's contact@walkintruth.com. You can also find our mailing address on walkintruth.com. And thanks for reaching out. A reminder, if you missed any part of today's program, maybe you just tuned in and you want to know, what is Pastor Michael talking about in that specific situation? Well, you can listen to today's episode and many other episodes of Walk in Truth on your favorite podcast app. In addition, we also have our new free Walk in Truth app where you can listen every single day and also watch videos. But if you'd like to listen to the Walk in Truth podcast, you'll find it on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and many more. Search Walk in Truth on your favorite podcast app to hear today's teaching and many other teachings in more books of the Bible.
We'd love to see who's listening, so please connect with us on Facebook or Instagram. Just do a search for Walk in Truth Show. Now, back to Pastor Michael Lantz right here on Walk in Truth.
Maybe we've put the idol back in front of our face because there's something in our flesh that wants to go back there, but we give it a Christian spin. I'm good. I can do that. Alistair Begg told a story. I think it was a man in his congregation who he was working with some buddies, and they used to go off to these so-called gentlemen's clubs, and he became a Christian, and he stopped. And 3 of his buddies were going to go one day, it was a Friday night, end of work. Hey, come on, let's go. And he goes, no, I don't go to those places anymore. I'm not going with you. Okay, Christian boy, Holy Joe. And they made fun of him, and they left, and he felt pretty terrible. And he went home, and he got a call over the weekend. And one of those men said to him, I want to know why you don't go to those places. I want to know why you don't go. You see, I just found out my wife is pregnant and we're going to have a baby girl. And I want to know why you don't go to those places. You see, the unbeliever understands that once we get saved, our lives are going to change. That we're not going to sit there and bow before the idols anymore that used to be in our lives. That we're going to make a break from those. And do you know that there's other people who want to make a break from them as well? But sometimes Christians are so trying to fit with the world. And look, Jesus was in places where there were parties and there were prostitutes and there were tax collectors and sinners. But Jesus would draw the line. And he would challenge people. He wasn't trying to look like them. He was trying to reach them. And I think there's a very fine line for us as believers. And they were probably saying something like this: Paul, you taught us, and Jesus said this, that food is really not an issue. Look at verse 8. Food will not commend us to God. It won't bring us closer to God. We are neither the worse if we do not eat, nor the better if we do eat. Now, I was raised in a Roman Catholic household, Italian Roman Catholic, and I think this may have changed in the Catholic Church. Maybe some of you can correct me if I'm wrong. But on Fridays, we were not supposed to eat meat. It was a day where when you didn't eat meat, it was like for penance. It was like if you've blown it during the week, that's something that you sacrifice to get back right with God. And I remember there were a couple times when I was a kid, and all of a sudden I was in the kitchen, I made it like a bologna sandwich, and I bit into it, and I went, oh no, it's Friday. I'm condemned. I knew Oscar Mayer was going to do me in. But the truth of the matter is that was just a tradition of the church. Food won't bring me closer to God and won't bring me farther away. Food is neutral. Now, food can affect your health. Food can impact you other ways, but spiritually speaking, Jesus said, what a man eats just goes into his body and is eliminated. It's not about your hands being clean or ceremonially clean. It's not about what you eat. It's what comes out of a man that defiles a man, not what goes into a man, but what comes out of a man. Food, like many things in life, is neutral. You're not better if you eat or worse if you do not eat. But food that is connected to idolatry is an issue. In fact, in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15:29, they said, these are the essentials we want to lay before you without any further burden. Write this down, Acts 15:29, that you abstain from things sacrificed to idols and from blood and from things strangled and from fornication. If you keep yourselves free from such things, you will do well. And then they say farewell. There are some essential things, and it is hard to divorce the food in this setting offered to an idol in an idol's temple, to divorce that from the idolatry that is going on within it. It is hard to draw that line and to somehow compartmentalize it. In fact, I'm going to argue that you can't do it. I'm going to argue that this is not a chapter about matters of opinion, and if you decide you want to go there, fine, and if another person says my conscience can't handle that, fine. No, I think this is more serious than Romans 14. I think Paul is giving a dire warning. Check this out. He says, but take care, verse 9. If you have an NIV, it says, be careful, lest this liberty, see the word liberty there? That's exousia in Greek, and it's a word that means authority or right or permission. Lest this authority of yours, this decision that you've made, probably a catchword for the Corinthian Christians of yours, somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. Now, we saw the weak a few verses ago, and Paul says, now be careful. You think you have a liberty to go back into the temple and do what you want to do, the pagan temples, but be careful, because this so-called right or authority that you have said you have may become an obstacle, a stumbling block. Literally, it may strike at the foot or the conscience of those who are weak and cause them to fall. Here's a modern application. If you're a Christian and you say to another Christian, I believe it's okay for us to go back and do this or that, and it is overtly, clearly sinful. If you give somebody counsel to commit sin against God, and think about, you guys are smart people, think about the modern applications. Think about the professing church that is saying to people who are in overt sin, whether it's popular or not to say this, they are in outright sin against God, and the church is saying, you're okay. They're winking at it. Or more so, they're even promoting it. They're saying, this is okay now. Ollie, ollie, oxen free. The bat phone rang, and God says, now, that one doesn't really matter anymore. Because the culture's changed, so we got to change with the times, do we? And so some people actually in pastoral positions are giving people the authority to go back and sin against God. And I want to say this as clearly as I can. That is a grave mistake, my friend. If you tell someone you are okay to go back to this, something that's clearly God has said is sinful, you are on shaky ground, and I'm going to say you're going to answer to God for it. If you get thrown a pitch about something culturally speaking, and you bunt instead of taking a full swing for the sake of political correctness, fill in the blanks, I think you know what I'm talking about, and you bunt or you swing and miss because you don't want to rock the boat of the culture, you're going to answer to God.
You've been listening to Knowledge Puffs Up, Love Builds Up, Part 4 on Walk in Truth. That was Pastor Michael's teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. Hey, I wanted to share a great resource with you. Check out the Walk in Truth podcast with Michael Lantz. He teaches straight through the Bible and applies it to today's issues and culture. It's really insightful and encouraging. You'll find Walk in Truth on your podcast app. If you're already listening to the podcast, please click the share button on your phone to spread the word. Now here's Pastor Michael with a final word.
Well, as I grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, the natural overflow of that ought to be that I love more like He loves. But you know what? We can have a tendency as human beings that as we grow in knowledge, we might think, well, I'm superior to, this person or that person. Well, that person's only been a Christian for 6 months, or this person doesn't hold my theological position on, eschatology or whatever. And maybe we think that we're superior. And if we start thinking that way, we can think we're right. We should hopefully be, resolved in our theological convictions, especially if we've been Christians for a long time. But thinking that you're right doesn't mean that you come across that way. We let everything we do be done in love. Once again, we're quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, James 1:19. And if we can remember that the one who was and is ultimately superior humbled himself for the sake of others. He was willing to listen to others, to hear their cries, to hear even their point of view, even if it needed to be radically corrected. If we are growing in true knowledge, we will become more like the Holy One. That will be the barometer, because growing in knowledge is one thing, but we don't want to think we're better than others. Rather, we want to impart as much love, truth, and grace as we can to other people. I hope that helps. This is Pastor Michael Lantz. You're listening to Walk in Truth, and we have been talking for a while now about opportunities that the Lord's presented to us. We have an opportunity in the Inland Empire right now, a local station where we can broadcast on Sundays, and we would love to walk through that open door. And we have commitments on radio. Just to give you an idea, we're more like a regional ministry right now. We would like to be a national ministry. I think we're on something like 8 to 10 radio stations. And it's a privilege, and we'd like to see more be done. But in order to do that, we're going to need partners, and we need partners who at every level could give $40 a month, $20 a month. And some of you who are listening to my voice can do a lot more. And maybe you've been praying for a while. Maybe you're a business owner or someone who has the means to be a person who could help underwrite this type of radio ministry. And you've been waiting and praying. And maybe you've been listening for a little while and you're like, you know what? Walk in Truth is solid, and I'd like to see more be done, more opportunities, more platforms, if you will, for the ministry. If that's you, I would just say it would be wonderful for us to partner and for you to get behind this ministry. And we're looking for those who can help us, underwrite the radio cost. I don't get paid to do radio, by the way. This is just simply an extension of the pastoral ministry that God's called me to. But we do need people to partner with us so that we could do more. We'd like to be on, every radio station we could worldwide, if that's what the Lord wills. And if He wills for us to stay on the stations we're on, then, His will be done. But if you're that person or one of those persons who could help underwrite, maybe you could help us into new territory, or even to underwrite our radio bill, which, our church puts out. I think it's well over $75,000 a year from our general budget towards radio, probably closer to $100,000. That would be awesome. So I just felt a nudge to say that. If that's you, here's what you could do. You go to walkintruth.com, you click on the donate button. walkintruth.com, click on the donate button. Or if you'd like to call us, we're available Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4 Pacific time at 844-48-TRUTH. That's 844-48-TRUTH. This is Pastor Michael, and we will talk to you, Lord willing, right here tomorrow.
And join us tomorrow for part 5 of Pastor Michael's teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 called Knowledge Puffs Up, Love Builds Up.
And he looked at me and he kind of knew what was going on with me because I had come out of a party lifestyle. And he goes, "You're hurting, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am hurting because I know what's right, but sometimes my flesh is so weak. I so wanted to ingest the things of God because I had taken in the things of the idol. And there were weekends, I'm just going to be completely candid and blunt with you, where I was depressed all weekend because I had gone back to the idol on Friday night, but I knew better. Can I get a witness?
I'm Mike Massaro on behalf of Pastor Michael Lantz and Living Truth Christian Fellowship. Thanks for listening to Walk in Truth, equipping you to reach out with God's truth to all people.